It was a blow that would have hacked the normal man's head clean off. Instead, Torrin pivoted on the ball of his right foot, nearly too fast for the eye to follow, and Ragnar's heavy blade rang against the Space Wolf's reinforced collarbone. The dulled sword split the skin in a pressure cut a quarter of a meter long across Torrin's chest, drawing a hiss of pain from the older warrior, and filling the air of the practice arena with the coppery scent of blood. At virtually the same instant, Torrin's sword swept down and struck lightly at Ragnar's left thigh before the Space Wolf's lunge carried him past his opponent, opening the distance across the sandy training ground. Dried blood crackling faintly along Ragnar's brow, the enhanced clotting factor in his blood had already stopped the bleeding from the scalp wound Torrin had given him seconds before. Both warriors were bare-chested, clad only in loose-fitting breeches, torn and stained from dozens of blows. Most Space Marine chapters preferred to practice their close combat skills with automated sparring drones or combat servitors, but the Space Wolves kept to the old ways of their homeworld, man-to-man and iron against iron. Both wolves were covered in angry red wheals and shallow cuts. They grimaced at the pain from torn muscles and wrenched ligaments. The wounds sharpened their wits and tested their wills in a way no mindless combat servitor could. Torrin continued to give ground, gliding effortlessly across the black volcanic sand. His iron sword was a little longer and thinner than the heavy broadsword in Ragnar's hand, lending the warrior a slight advantage in speed and reach. The weapon suited him. Torrin was tall and lean, almost lithe compared to Ragnar's broad-chested bulk. His blade flickered back and forth through the air, more often than not avoiding directly blocking the younger Space Wolf's more massive blade, and leaving Ragnar swinging at empty air. The older warrior's blows were fluid and precise, striking sharply along leg or arm, and withdrawing again, as though intending to goad Ragnar into anger rather than strike a killing blow. If that was Torrin's plan, Ragnar had to admit it was working. The young Space Wolf lowered his head and charged at Torrin with a furious bellow. Gauging the distance carefully, he aimed a fierce blow at the older Space Wolf's temple, and then checked the feint at the last moment and reversed the angle of the blow, slashing hard at Torrin's thigh. Quick as he was, Torrin was still faster. Instead of trying to parry Ragnar's blade or turn aside, he leapt forward and past Ragnar's right side. The sleek blade scored another shallow cut on the inside of Ragnar's right arm. Snarling furiously, Ragnar spun and lunged for Torrin's retreating back, jabbing the blunt tip against his opponent's shoulder blade, hard enough to draw a painful grunt from the older Space Marine, but not enough to translate into a killing blow. Torrin threw himself forward into a shoulder roll across the black sand, coming up facing Ragnar a few meters away with his sword at the ready. The older Space Wolf's lean face quirked into a faintly mocking grin. "Good, but not good enough," he said.
"I came down here to fight, not dance,"
Ragnar growled.
"If you'd sit still for half a second, you'd be dead."
Torrin's mocking grin deepened. "A compelling reason not to sit still, don't you think?" he replied.
"Mokai's frozen bollocks!"
boomed a thunderous voice from the edge of the arena.
"Will you two quit yapping and get on with it?"
A massive figure rose ponderously from a stone bench near the arena entrance, brandishing a gnawed leg bone in his knobby fist like a greasy, gristly club. Rich, honey-colored ale sloshed from an enormous drinking horn clutched in Hagar's left hand and slashed over his thick fingers.
"If I were in there, I would have killed the both of you and be halfway back to the mead hall."
The huge warrior's bushy red whiskers and bristly eyebrows lent Hagar the appearance of an enlarged walrus. Torrin laughed. His voice was light, but his dark eyes never left Ragnar's face.
"Iron sword against ice mammoth haunch? I think I'd like to see you try." "Bah!"
Hagar exclaimed, pausing to lick the spilled ale from his scarred knuckles.
"The mighty Hagar does not play at fighting, Torrin. What he fights, he kills. You should know that by now. And if I killed the two of you, who'd be left to guard the Lady Gabriella besides me?"
The older Space Wolf rolled his eyes in mock disdain. "Who can argue with wisdom like that?" Ragnar nearly had him. Just as Torrin spoke, he lunged forward, his blade slashing in a blurring figure of 8. For a fraction of a second, Torrin appeared to be caught off guard. He blocked one cut with a ringing blow that sent sparks flying from his sword, and barely ducked aside a brutal cut from the opposite angle. Again, his swift blade flicked out, biting painfully at Ragnar's groin, but this time, the young Space Wolf kept right on coming, hammering at Torrin's head, neck and shoulders. The older Space Wolf backpedaled furiously, his face growing taut with strain. He was forced to block one blow, and then another. Then a third stroke snapped the thinner blade with a discordant clang. Ragnar's sword continued alongside its arc and cracked hard against Torrin's left cheekbone. knocking the Space Wolf onto his back. Ragnar leapt forward, stomping down hard on the inside of Torrin's right thigh to pin him in place, and then pressing the blunt tip of his blade into the hollow of his opponent's throat.
This dance is over, he growled,
his hand tightening on the grip of his sword.
Next time you fight me, try something other than a toy sword.
Blood flowed in thick streams down Torrin's ragged cheek and into his thin moustache. He regarded Ragnar coldly.
The fight ended 5 seconds ago before you broke my sword, he said. I killed you, but you were too thick-headed to realize it.
What, that bee sting?
Torrin pushed Ragnar's blade aside and climbed slowly to his feet. He pointed at the spot where his last blow had fallen.
Femoral artery,
he said. He then pointed to the cut alongside the inside of Ragnar's sword arm.
Brachial artery.
Torrin jabbed at a fading red mark on Ragnar's abdomen.
Main pulmonary artery. Even with the clotting factor, I'd have bled you white about 2 minutes ago.
He turned away and limped over to the broken half of his blade, sticking up from the sands a few meters away.
You should have paid more attention, my friend. Half a dozen minor blows are just as deadly as one big one.
Torrin bent and picked up the battered shard of iron. He frowned, turning it over in his hands.
I had to have this specially made, you know.
Torrin's cold dissection of the battle drained all the heat out of Ragnar's blood, leaving the younger Space Wolf vaguely shamed.
You're right, of course,
he said heavily, tossing his notched sword into the sand.
Forgive me, brother,
Ragnar said, holding out his hand.
Give me the pieces of the blade, and I'll beg a boon from one of the Iron Priests to have it remade.
The older Space Wolf shook his head, waving Ragnar's hand away with the broken shard of iron.
There is nothing to forgive, my friend. The fault is as much mine as yours. I prodded you on purpose, trying to draw out some of the melancholy that's gripped you these last few months. Much as it pains me to say it, Torrin's right,
Hagar said, worrying at a piece of gristle with his fangs.
Here we are back on Fenris, the land of heroes, and all you've done since we got here is mope.
Scowling, Ragnar turned away, heading for the bench where the rest of his clothes were laid.
The chapter is at war, he said darkly,
reaching for his wool and leather tunic.
We should be out there, fighting alongside our brothers.
Ragnar thought of Sven, his old packmate, fighting with Beric Thunderfist's great company on Charis. No doubt they were celebrating their victory in the governor's palace even now, while he haunted the stone halls of the Fang like some Nifling.
Our place is at Gabriella's side,
Torrin said evenly.
We have a sacred duty to House Belisarius,
Ragnar. Now more than ever. Torrin served as a member of the Space Wolves chapter during the 41st millennium. A peculiarity amongst the Sons of Rus who prides himself on his appearance. This member of the elite bodyguard of House Belisarius adorns himself with fineries befitting his standing. The reason for his choice to serve the Navigator House of Terror never revealed to those who pry. It is likely that his deference to traditions and customs, not of his kinsmen, alienated him from his kindred. Preferring sips of wine to gulps of ale and a more reserved manner of combat to howling charges, the so-called Wayfarer delights in the political machinations of the throne world, fought amongst the wealthy and powerful. The quintessential dandy, contrasting starkly with his boisterous brothers, many are caught off guard by this hulking giant, styled and perfumed in a manner that most Astartes would find distasteful. A deadly combatant, both at range and in melee combat, his accuracy with a heavy bolter and finesse with a sword are the envy of those who observe him. His unbeaten unarmed contests against his stalwart friend, Hagar the Mountain, emblematic of his ability to best even the strongest of foes. Loyal to a fault of his kinsman of the Wolfblade, his tutelage of the young wolf, Ragnar Blackmane, would prove instrumental in molding him into the warrior of legend with which he would become. Accompanying Ragnar during their investigation of the plot to destroy House Belisarius, his duty to protect Lady Gabriella is a testament to the loyal disposition of the Space Wolves and their vaunted reputation as honorable souls. Such was his deeds, fighting alongside the Dark Angels upon the surface of Hyades. Old grudges were set aside for the good of the Imperium. The strike team of Lion's Pride, impressed with the Space Wolves' bearing and capabilities. Returning to Fenris alongside Hagar and Ragnar in order to thwart the plots of the fell sorcerer, Maddox. When within the company of his kindred, Torrin allowed his hair and beard to grow unkempt once more, fostering his camaraderie with those he had been estranged to for so long. Combating the forces of chaos during the Charis campaign as Ragnar and Hagar laid low the Thousand Sun champion, Though Hagar perished in the battle, Torrin would not forsake his vows to protect House Belisarius, and thus return to Holy Terror. Grieving for the loss of his stalwart friend, never again would Ragnar Blackmane see his foppish comrade, even following his ascension as a Wolf Lord of the chapter. His reflections of his tenure as a Wolfblade swelling his heart with pride. Perhaps Torrin still serves Lady Gabriella to this day, delighting on the finer things which terror can provide.